Let's deal with the elegy written in a Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray, which is probably one of the most famous early Romantic poets. This elegy is, as the title indicates, a poem which centers on the death of a person. An elegy is lyrical rather than narrative. That is, its purpose is to express feelings about its subject, in this case, sad feelings about the death of a nice person, someone we think is worth remembering, rather than to tell a story. An elegy expresses feelings of loss and sorrow, and at the same time, an elegy praises the deceased, that is, the dead person, and comments on the meaning of this person's time on earth. Gray's poem reflects on the lives of humble people who are buried in the cemetery of a church. And in this case, we can say that unlike Ugo Foscolo, Gray focuses on humble people. Ugo Foscolo, in his Dei Sepolcri, describes a church, a famous church in Florence, that is Santa Croce, which is defined as l'urne dei forti, that is a place where big people, big examples of great Italians are buried. So Foscolo reflects on the meaning of the tombs, the graves of great people. Gray's poem is more democratic, and it deals with the life and death of humble people. Where and when is the poem set? The time is the middle of the 18th century, mid-1700s, a decade that is 10 years before the Industrial Revolution began in England. The place where the poem is set is a cemetery of a church. Very probably the church is St. Giles in the small town of Buckinghamshire in southern England. Gray himself is buried there in that country churchyard, in that cemetery. Thomas Gray wrote his elegy in 4-line stanzas, that is, in quatrains. Each line is in iambic pentameter, meaning that each line has 5 pairs of syllables for a total of 10 syllables. In each pair, the first syllable is unstressed and the second is stressed, as in the 2 lines that open the poem. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. In each stanza, the first line rhymes with the third, and the second line rhymes with the fourth. A stanza with the above-mentioned characteristics, that is 4 lines, iambic pentameter, and an A-B rhyme scheme, is often referred to as a heroic quatrain. Quatrain is derived from the Latin word quatuor, meaning 4. Now, what are the main themes that we can find in Thomas Gray's elegy? First of all, death, considered as the great equalizer. Even the proud and the mighty must one day lie beneath the earth, like the humble men and women now buried in the churchyard. So, death equalizes us all. No grandiose memorials and no flattering words about the deceased can bring him or her back from death. There are 2 reasons why Gray's elegy is often defined as a democratic elegy. First, because, as we saw, death is the great equalizer. Death makes all men and women on earth equal. And there's a second reason, because the elegy is about missed opportunities. There are a lot of people, a lot of talented people, who never get the opportunity to find what they deserve because of poverty or other handicaps. If we consider this stanza, the gem at the bottom of the ocean may represent an undiscovered musician, a poet, a scientist, a philosopher. We will never know if in the country village such a great man might have lived. The flower may also stand for a person of great and noble qualities that are wasted on the desert air, because these people, these poor people who lived a humble, a simple life, never had the opportunity to study, to get a proper education. And maybe they were talented people. We will never really know what kind of men and women lived in the churchyard. Yet, living in a poor country village has its positive side. In this rural setting, very far from the temptations of the cities or of the courts of kings, these country villagers led virtuous lives. They were never contaminated by vices, by what is worst of industrial towns, what is worst in being rich. If we have a closer look at Thomas Gray's life, we can better understand the reason why he points at the virtue of living in a simple, humble, rural setting. Gray was the only one of 12 children who survived in a poor family. He was recognized as a poet, and England offered him the post of poet laureate, which was really a very good thing for a poet. But Gray rejected the honor because he was that kind of person who didn't care about fame and adulation. He preferred keeping his life as simple as he could. Now let us scan the poem, the elegy, in order to find some proof for what we have just said. Let us consider stanza 8, when Gray wrote, "Let not ambition mock their useful toil, their homely joys and destiny obscure." First of all, we have to consider that ambition is a personification which refers to ambitious people, to rich people who spend their life looking for lofty and rich goals. Gray doesn't want them to make a fool of the poor people who live in this simple, humble country village and who are now buried in this churchyard. He knows that their joys were simple, were homely. Their destiny never reached fame. It remained obscure. Grandeur, that is wealth or power or social standing, never smiled at these people. Their lives are not written in annals. Their annals, the annals of poor people, are very short and simple, meaning that there's not much to say about the life of a simple countryman. The people who live in this simple country village, and those who used to live there and are now buried in this country churchyard never had the opportunity to study, to get a proper education. And here we find this marvelous image. Knowledge never unrolled her ample page to their eyes, meaning that knowledge never revealed itself to these poor people who maybe could not read, so they could never read books with a lot of information. Poverty repressed their enthusiasm. Poverty froze the flow of their ideas. Even though among these people some genius lived, he could never express himself because he was born poor. Gray, in other words, is comparing the humble village people to those gems that remain undiscovered in caves which are hidden at the bottom of the ocean, and nobody will ever get to find these gems. Or there's another comparison. These people are similar to those flowers who live in the desert, where nobody can ever discover them, so their flavor goes to waste because there's nobody there to feel, to appreciate this good smell of these desert flowers. Here is something that Gray and Ugo Foscolo have in common: the fact that both writers mentioned some great examples of great men. Thomas Gray mentions John Hampden, John Milton, and Oliver Cromwell, just like Foscolo mentioned, for example, Vittorio Alfieri or Giuseppe Parini as great examples of Italian men. But the reason why Gray mentions Hampden or Cromwell or Milton is totally different. Here, Gray is pointing at the fact that we will never know if among those people who are now buried in the country churchyard, there was a person who can be similar to Hampden or Milton or Cromwell. Maybe somebody with a great talent, a great politician, a great poet. We will never know if someone who was born, who lived, who died in the country village had as much talent as Hampden, Milton, Cromwell. For one reason, because they never had the opportunity to study, to get an education. So once again, Thomas Gray's elegy wants to mark out the injustice of being born in a poor country village. Now we need to go back to stanza 11 to find a question, which is another thing that Thomas Gray and Ugo Foscolo have in common. The question about the function of tombs. Ugo Foscolo opens his very long poem entitled Dei Sepolcri with the question, forse all'ombra dei cipressi oppure dentro l'urne, al riparo dal sole, dalla pioggia, perché si è all'ombra di un cipresso, è meno duro il sonno della morte, And Thomas Gray asks, can an urn, can a tomb, can a nicely storied urn bring a dead person back to life? Can a soul be called back to the body by an urn, although it is a fantastic, a great storied urn? Can honor, which we as living people attribute to the dead person, make this person come back to life? Of course, the answer in both cases is no. No memorials, no urns can ever bring a person back to life. Yet here lies the big difference between Foscolo's poem and Gray's Elegy. According to Foscolo, the real function of a tomb, especially the tomb of a great man, is reminding all the living people of the dead person's greatness. The hope is to push these people to imitate such great men in order to make their country a better place, in order to stimulate this idea of emulation, of imitation, the imitation of a great man. In the case of Gray's Elegy, death functions as an equalizer. Death brings justice back to earth. Both rich people, great people, and humble people will die of the same death. So death makes us all equal. There's an epitaph that is a sort of last farewell that closes Gray's Elegy. This epitaph is dedicated to Thomas Gray's best friend, Richard West, who died very young. Richard West was a poet, and Gray did not mention him openly, but we do understand that this youth, this young man, unknown to fortune and fame, must refer to Richard West. He was a man of humble birth who never knew fortune or fame, but who actually became a scholar, who studied, who got to know what science, what literature, what history are. Although he was depressed at times, Gray says melancholy marked him. He led a good life. He was a good person, a good man, sensitive to the needs of others. He followed God's laws. It's very sweet but sad to read that Richard West gave all he had to misery, that is, to miserable, to poor people, even when all he had was his tears.